Olivia's feet hit the aisle before her brain caught up. She had been gone for 7 minutes. 7 minutes. She told herself it was fine. Soo-yeon was asleep. The seatbelt sign was off. She just needed to stretch her legs, splash cold water on her face, breathe. 14 hours from Atlanta to Seoul was not a joke, and her nerves were already strung so tight she could hear them humming. 7 minutes. She came back and the seat was empty. Not just empty. The little pink blanket was folded. The stuffed rabbit, the one Soo-yeon had refused to leave Atlanta without, was sitting upright on the seat like someone had placed it there deliberately. Soo-yeon? Nothing. Olivia turned left. Then right. A man in a business suit glanced up from his laptop and looked away quickly. A flight attendant pushing a cart gave her a polite smile and kept moving. Soo-yeon. Louder this time. Heads turned. She didn't care. She checked the bathroom. Knocked once, twice, pushed it open when there was no answer. Empty. She spun around and her heart was doing something that wasn't a heartbeat anymore. It was a fist slamming against the inside of her chest, over and over. Ma'am, is everything okay? A flight attendant materialized at her elbow, young, polished, the kind of calm that only exists in people who have never been responsible for a child at 30,000 feet. The little girl I'm traveling with. She's 6. She was right there. Olivia pointed at the empty seat. I was gone for 7 minutes. Where does a 6-year-old go on a plane? The flight attendant's face shifted. Just slightly. Let me check with my colleagues. No, don't check. Find her. Olivia was already moving toward the back of the plane. Economy. Economy plus. The galley. The second bathroom. Nothing. She turned around and walked faster this time. Toward the front, toward business class, toward the curtain she had eyed when they boarded. The one that separated regular humans from whatever world existed on the other side. She pulled the curtain back and stopped. Soo-yeon was sitting in a wide leather seat, legs dangling because they didn't reach the floor, her stuffed rabbit clutched against her chest. She was eating a piece of chocolate, and she was laughing. The man sitting beside her was not laughing. He was watching Soo-yeon with the quiet attention of someone who had forgotten, just for a moment, that they were not supposed to find things charming. He was Korean, maybe early 30s. The kind of still that didn't come from relaxation. It came from practice. His suit was dark. His watch caught the cabin light once, and Olivia's brain registered something obscene about its cost before she pushed the thought away. 2 men sat 3 rows behind him. They weren't sleeping. They weren't reading. They were just sitting there, eyes forward, the way people sit when their job is to be invisible. Olivia didn't process any of that. She processed Soo-yeon. She crossed the section in 4 steps, grabbed Soo-yeon by the wrist, and pulled her out of the seat. Yinny, don't. Her voice came out lower than she expected. Controlled. Don't say a word. Come here. She positioned herself between Soo-yeon and the man, the way you position yourself between a child and every unfamiliar thing when that child has been placed in your care. Don't ever sit with strangers. She said it loud enough that the whole cabin heard it. Do you understand me? Ever. The cabin went quiet. Not the polite quiet of people minding their business. The breath-held quiet of people watching something they cannot look away from. The flight attendant who had been trailing Olivia pushed through the curtain and stopped. The man looked at Olivia. He had not moved, had not flinched, had not done anything except look at her with an expression so unreadable it made her angrier. She came to me, he said. His English was precise. Unhurried. I don't care. Ma'am. The flight attendant touched her arm and Olivia turned. The woman's expression had changed. Ma'am, I need to tell you something. He's the one who told us to look for you. When the little girl arrived here, he called one of our crew immediately and asked us to locate her guardian. The air left Olivia's lungs. He said, the flight attendant glanced at the man briefly. He said, and I'm quoting, find her mother before she panics. Silence. Soo-yeon looked up at Olivia with those big eyes that always saw too much. He gave me chocolate and told me to wait. He said you were coming. Olivia looked at the little girl. Then she looked at the man. He was still watching her. Not with amusement. Not with irritation. With something that looked dangerously close to patience. The embarrassment didn't arrive quietly. It crashed. She opened her mouth. Closed it. Her hand was still on Soo-yeon's shoulder, gripping tighter than necessary. He looked away first. Not rudely. Like he was giving her a moment. The flight attendant gently guided her back. Let me get you both settled, ma'am. Olivia let herself be guided. She did not look back. But she felt it. The weight of those eyes. even after she'd turned away. The kind of presence that doesn't disappear just because you're no longer facing it. She sat down, buckled Soo-yeon in, stared at the headrest in front of her. Soo-yeon leaned over and whispered, "He was nice, Yini Olivia." Olivia closed her eyes. A few hours earlier. Drop a comment right now. Where in the world are you watching this from? I want to see how far this story is reaching. And if you're new here, you might want to subscribe before this gets complicated. Olivia James had not planned on making this trip alone. The original arrangement had been clean and logical. Ha-jun would fly from Seoul to Atlanta, spend 2 weeks with her and his niece Soo-yeon, who had been staying with Olivia while Ha-jun's older sister Jina recovered from surgery back in Seoul, and then all three of them would fly back together for the Park family annual gathering. Straightforward, organized, the kind of plan that holds its shape on paper and looks like a life being built in an orderly, intentional direction. Then Ha-jun called. 3 days before his flight, something had come up with the business. He couldn't make it to Atlanta. He would meet her in Seoul instead. He was sorry. He would make it up to her. Olivia sat at her kitchen table in Atlanta and held the phone after he hung up. She was thinking about the specific texture of that apology, the way it had been delivered efficiently, the sorry folded so tightly inside logistics that there was no actual space for her to respond to it as a feeling, only as a change of plan. She was thinking about the 2 other occasions in the past 6 weeks when something had come up with the business at the exact moment she had needed Ha-jun to show up somewhere. She was thinking about a question that had been sitting just below the surface of her thinking for a while now, asking quietly to be looked at directly. She filed the thought away without looking at it straight on. She had a ring on her finger. She had a future she had been building carefully and with real hope. She was not going to pull at that thread over a canceled flight. Soo-yeon was at the kitchen table with a coloring book, working with the focused precision of someone who had decided coloring was a technical exercise rather than a loose creative one. She looked up when Olivia set the phone down. "Is Uncle Ha-jun not coming?" she asked. "He'll meet us in Seoul," Olivia said. "He's excited to see you." Soo-yeon considered this for a moment with those dark, computing eyes. Then she went back to her coloring book without comment. Olivia stood at the kitchen counter and told herself everything was fine. She was 32 years old. Interior architect. A portfolio that had been making the right people pay attention for several years and had recently, through channels that still quietly astonished her, reached the ears of Park and Associates in Seoul, one of the most respected architectural firms in East Asia. They had made an approach. There were conversations about a project role, a consulting arrangement, what it might look like for her to bring her particular eye to their work. It was the kind of door that did not open twice, and she had been walking toward it with everything she had. She had met Ha-jun 18 months ago at an industry event in New York. He was charming in the way of men who have understood that charm is a skill worth honing, not shallow, but intentional. He was sharp and funny, and he looked at her like she was the most interesting thing in whatever room they were in together. That quality of attention from someone like him had been, she could admit now, somewhat intoxicating. They had done long distance across 12 time zones for almost a year. Then he proposed. Then she had started seriously exploring Seoul, because she was going to build a life there, in his world, in his family, beside him. She had given that future a great deal of care and thought. She had arranged and rearranged it in her mind. She had imagined herself into it from multiple angles. What she had perhaps not examined carefully enough was whether Ha-jun was doing the same. Whether the version of him she had fallen for in New York and Atlanta, and in the hours of video calls across 12 time zones was the same person who existed in Seoul, in the weight of his actual daily life, in the middle of his family and his business, and the particular pressures of who the Park family were and what they required of him. But she was not sitting with that on the plane. On the plane, she had one responsibility: get Soo-yeon home safely. That was what Jina had trusted her to do, and Olivia did not fail at things she had been trusted to do. Soo-yeon was not easy in the way that obedient children are easy. She was particular. She had Jina's dark, patient eyes and the family tendency, which Olivia had noticed in Ha-jun too, though it expressed itself differently, toward thorough assessment before any commitment. She had spent 2 weeks in Atlanta being systematically and thoroughly fascinated. The food, the layout of American houses, the scale of the highways, the neighbor with 3 large dogs who slept on all the furniture and appeared to receive no censure for this. She asked questions all day, every day, but never impatiently and never randomly. Each question was the logical next step in an investigation that had been running continuously since the last one. She had told Olivia on the third day that she found curtains in non-window locations suspicious. Olivia had asked why. Because, Soo-yeon said, with the patience of someone explaining something they considered obvious, curtains are for hiding things. If there is no window, then what is being hidden? Olivia had laughed. She had said it was a very good question. On the plane, Soo-yeon had been excellent for the first 4 hours. Korean cartoons. Methodical consumption of plain cookies. Occasional deliberate nudges to show Olivia something on the screen that Soo-yeon had decided Olivia would genuinely want to see. Then she had fallen asleep the way she did everything. With full commitment, suddenly and completely, as if she had made a decision and executed it without delay. Olivia had watched her sleep for a while. There was something about it that always settled something in her. The way Soo-yeon's hand had found Olivia's arm even in sleep and held on. Reflexively, automatically, with the total trust of a child who had decided this person was safe and was not thinking about it anymore because it was already decided. Olivia had felt something move in her chest that surprised her with how complete it was. Something warm and fiercely certain that had nothing to do with Ha-jun and everything to do with this particular small person who had spent 2 weeks investigating her life and approved of what she found. Then she tried to work on the Seoul project proposal, gave up on the proposal, stared out the window, decided she needed water and movement, and she would be gone for 7 minutes. 7 minutes. The thing about Soo-yeon was that she didn't wander. She investigated. A curtain in a non-window location was not something she could walk past without understanding. It was not in her nature. It had never been in her nature, and 2 weeks in Atlanta had not changed that. On the plane, Soo-yeon had woken up, seen the curtain at the front of the cabin, made a decision, and walked through it. On the other side was Jin-hoo. He was always awake on long flights. Sleep at altitude had come to feel irresponsible, an old habit, developed over years of being in situations where the cost of switching off was simply too high, where the world had a tendency to change between one moment and the next, and you needed to be present for the change. He had a glass of water and a document he had been attempting to read for over an hour. Somewhere around the 40-minute mark it had stopped making sense. He was staring at the words without processing them when the curtain moved. He looked up. A small girl in a pink sweater stood at the edge of the VIP section, holding a stuffed rabbit in her left hand, conducting what appeared to be a systematic visual assessment of the space. She had the focused, methodical attention of someone who had been sent to evaluate the situation and intended to do so thoroughly. She saw him, assessed him with the directness that belongs to very young children and very confident adults. Looked at the seat beside him. Is anyone sitting there? Korean. Clear and unhurried, like someone accustomed to asking precise questions. No, he said. She climbed up, settled in with the purposeful efficiency of someone claiming a working space. Positioned the rabbit on the armrest with careful deliberation, not carelessly, but placed, as if the rabbit's position had been considered. Then she looked at him with the full attention directness of a child who had never learned that looking at someone was something you were supposed to pretend you weren't doing. I'm Soo-yeon. He looked at her for a moment. Jin-hoo. I know, she said. He went very still in a way that was different from his usual stillness. The usual stillness was a choice. This was something else. You know? You look like Uncle Ha-jun, but more quiet. She said this as pure observation, no inflection of compliment or criticism. Are you the cousin? Something shifted behind his eyes. He looked at her more carefully now, with new information running. Which cousin? The one nobody talks about at dinner. She said this with complete equanimity, as if it were a standard and recognizable category. Uncle Ha-jun says you're very busy. He was quiet for a moment. He's right. She nodded, apparently filing this information in a satisfactory location. Then she noticed the small bowl of chocolates on the table beside him. She looked at them, looked at him, returned to the chocolates with the expression of someone who has identified a variable and is now calculating the appropriate approach. You can take one, he said. She picked one up, looked at it with genuine assessment. Put it carefully back. Olivia said not to take things from strangers, she said. Not as a complaint. As policy. As a principle she had internalized and applied. Something moved in his expression. Not a smile exactly. Something more considered than a smile. She's right, he said. Soo-yeon looked at him with the thoughtful expression she wore when working through a logical problem in real time. But you're not really a stranger if I know your name and you're Uncle Ha-jun's cousin. She appeared to be constructing the argument as she spoke it. Those are two separate connections. Either one would reduce the strangeness. Both together should eliminate it. He considered the argument with the seriousness it deserved. That's a reasonable position. Soo-yeon picked the chocolate back up. I thought so, she said, and put it in her mouth. He called the flight attendant 30 seconds later. In Korean, quiet and precise. There is a child in VIP. Find her guardian before she panics. Now here's where it gets interesting. Because the flight attendant, a young woman named Yuna who had worked this route for 3 years and believed she had encountered every variety of situation a long-haul cabin could produce, had to walk back through the curtain into economy and conduct a quiet, efficient search operation for a woman who was at that exact moment standing at a bathroom sink with cold water on her face, telling herself she was absolutely fine. That Ha-jun being absent was not a sign of anything. That Seoul was going to be wonderful and the gathering would go well, and the ring on her finger meant exactly what it was supposed to mean. By the time Olivia came back and found the empty seat, Yuna was 2 rows away, approaching with purpose. Her colleague was already stationed at the VIP curtain with instructions not to let the child move under any circumstances. They converged simultaneously, Olivia accelerating forward, Yuna closing in from the other direction, and the rest unraveled exactly as you saw it. Olivia sat in her seat now, Soo-yeon asleep beside her, rabbit tucked under her chin. The hum of the plane surrounding them like a held breath. She was thinking about the man's face when she had grabbed Soo-yeon. The quality of that stillness. The way he hadn't moved or rushed or defended himself until the evidence was already in the room making its own case. The way he had looked away first, not in defeat or embarrassment, but in the deliberate, considered way of someone who has decided to give another person room to process something. She thought, who does that? She thought, I owe him an apology. She composed it 3 times in the next 40 minutes. 3 times she had the words ready. 3 times she looked at the curtain, looked at Soo-yeon sleeping, and sat back down. She told herself this was rational, that the awkwardness was already at full capacity and adding an apology to it would serve no useful purpose. She believed this argument for almost the full 40 minutes. Then Yuna appeared with a tray, warm tea, a small juice box, a single wrapped chocolate. From the gentleman in VIP, Yuna said quietly. He asked me to pass this along. She held out a folded note. Olivia opened it. 3 words. Neat handwriting. Unhurried, even in ink. Safe travels. J. She sat with the note in her hand for a long time. Soo-yeon found the juice box in her sleep without opening her eyes, like a small, precise homing device. Olivia tucked it into her fingers and drank the tea and thought about the specific quality of a person who responds to being publicly accused and then vindicated by sending tea and 3 words and asking for absolutely nothing in return. She thought about Ha-jun, about the way he would have handled that same situation. He would have been warm about it, charming. He would have laughed and deflected and made the other person feel slightly guilty for having noticed anything at all, and by the end of it everyone in the vicinity would have felt faintly responsible for the misunderstanding rather than the other way around. It was one of the things she had found magnetic about him when they first met, that effortless social intelligence. The way he could smooth anything over without appearing to try. She was beginning to understand that the smoothing was the thing you needed to pay attention to. What was being smoothed? What was underneath the surface being made so frictionless? She folded the note, put it in the pocket of her jacket, looked out the window at the dark 30,000 feet below, and thought, I'm flying to Seoul to meet a man I'm engaged to. I should feel one particular way about that. I should feel a specific, clear, certain thing. She felt several things. Not all of them were about Ha-jun. But we haven't gotten to the airport yet. Incheon Airport was enormous and alive and smelled like the beginning of something Olivia hadn't fully mapped yet. Soo-yeon was awake and attached to her left hand, her eyes moving systematically across everything with the expression of someone conducting a reconciliation. Comparing the city she had left with the city she was re-entering through the fresh eyes of someone who had been somewhere else for 2 weeks. I've been here before, she announced. I know, baby. But it looks different when you've been somewhere else first. Olivia looked down at her. That is genuinely one of the truest things anyone has ever said. Soo-yeon accepted this with dignity. I know. Immigration was long. Baggage was longer. By the time they came out into the arrivals hall, Olivia's feet had formed a union and were submitting formal grievances, and Soo-yeon was operating on the last clean edge of her energy, still upright, still composed, still conducting herself with the dignity she considered appropriate in public spaces, but only barely. Olivia was scanning for Gina's driver when she felt it. The shift in the room. Not a sound she could name. Not a visible movement she could point to. A change in density. The crowd adjusting its flow without appearing to, the way water adjusts around something solid without being asked to. She looked left. Jin-woo walked out of a side corridor with two men behind him. But now there were more, four total, dark clothes. All moving with the seamless, unconscious coordination of people who had made this exact approach enough times for it to stop requiring thought. A woman in a sharp blazer was on the phone and walking at the same time with the ease of someone who considered these two activities inseparable. Outside the glass doors, 3 black cars waited. Not hired, not service. The kind of vehicles that exist to say something about their occupant before he has said a word. 2 men in suits stood at the lead car. The door opened as Jin-woo arrived without any visible signal being given. The woman with the phone ended her call, produced a folder from somewhere, passed it to him without breaking stride. He took it without looking at it. Soo-yeon pressed close to Olivia's side. "That's the cousin," she said low. "I see him. He has so many people with him now." "Yes, he does. He only had 2 on the plane." "He had 2 on the plane that you saw," Olivia said. "I think there were probably more." Soo-yeon considered this. Were they hiding? They were being discreet. Why? Olivia watched the convoy arrange itself outside the doors. Watched the crowd in the arrivals hall unconsciously part around Jin-woo's path, without anyone directing them to. The instinctive parting of people who register something without being able to say what they are registering. "Because that's his job," she said. Jin-woo paused at the doors. Turned his head, not scanning, not searching, just turning, directly toward her, across the full width of the arrivals hall, as if he had always known exactly where she was standing and had simply chosen this particular moment to acknowledge it. 2 seconds. 3. Unhurried. Then the car. The door. The convoy pulled out into Seoul's gray morning. Olivia stood in the middle of the arrivals hall with the note still in her jacket pocket and one thought that kept presenting itself with patient insistence. Ha-jun never mentioned him. Not his name. Not a reference. Not a "that's my cousin. He runs the serious side of things." Not a single word in 18 months that would have prepared her for what she had just watched organize itself and drive away. Soo-yeon tugged at her hand. "Yini, Olivia. I'm really hungry now." "I know, sweetheart. Let's find your mom's driver. We're going home." Gina was at the apartment, steadier than Olivia had been led to expect, her recovery more advanced than Ha-jun had described in their conversations. When she opened the door and saw Soo-yeon, she went completely still for a moment. The stillness of a parent absorbing the fact of their child's safe return as a physical reality rather than just a scheduled event. And then she held Soo-yeon for a long time without speaking. When she finally looked up at Olivia over the top of Soo-yeon's head, she said, "Thank you for bringing her home." "She was wonderful," Olivia said. Genuinely. She asked probably 100 questions, and every single one of them was the right question. Gina smiled at this. She gets the questions from Ha-jun's side. She looked at Olivia then with the particular, careful attention of a woman who has been observing people her whole life and has become very accurate at it. She held the look just a fraction too long to be purely social. Not unfriendly. Not accusatory. Something closer to, "I see more than I'm saying, and I want you to know that I see it. Even if we don't speak it yet. Even if this is not the moment." Olivia held the look evenly. Communicated, without speaking, that she had received it. Then Gina turned back to Soo-yeon. "Come," she said. "I made dinner." That night in the guest room, lying still and listening to Seoul do its layered, sleepless thing outside the window, Olivia thought about the note. About the convoy. About Ha-jun calling with a sorry that had moved too efficiently through itself. About Gina's look in the doorway, and what exactly it had been communicating, and whether Olivia was reading it correctly or reading into it the thing she was already afraid of. She thought about the specific shape of the future she had been building. The firm in Seoul, the apartment she had been imagining, the version of mornings in this city she had constructed carefully in her mind over 18 months. And she thought about whether the foundation of all of it was as solid as she had been assuming. Whether it had ever been tested. Whether she had been asking the right questions. She told herself it was fine. She turned out the light. She lay awake for a long time. Now here's the part nobody prepares you for. The gathering was Saturday. Olivia spent the afternoon getting ready with the care of a woman who understood that the first time you enter a fiancé's family home for a significant event is not a moment to treat casually. She wore deep green, clean, deliberate lines. The kind of elegance that communicates. I took this seriously without appearing to have taken it to pieces. The ring on her left hand caught the light the way Ha-jun had said it would when he placed it there. She looked at it for a moment longer than was strictly necessary. She arrived with Jina and Soo-yeon because Ha-jun had said he would meet her there. The park residence was the kind of building that communicated its own history before you finished the walk up the path. Architecture built not to show off, but to endure. Lights strung through the garden, soft and deliberate. Music from inside. People in clothes whose cost was not something discussed in this kind of room, because that was not how things were discussed in this kind of room. Olivia kept her chin up. She had learned a long time ago that the best defense against feeling like you don't fully belong somewhere is to move like you do. She found Jina in the crowd and was 20 minutes into a conversation about the architectural detailing of the East Corridor when Jina went still. Olivia turned. Ha-jun was at the entrance. He was not alone. The woman beside him was beautiful, composed, positioned at his side with the ease of someone who had occupied that position before and found it comfortable. Ha-jun's hand rested at the small of her back, not lightly, not in the way of acquaintance. With the unconscious, practiced ease of a man touching someone in a particular place so many times that he no longer thought about it. The room kept moving. The music continued. Every conversation in every corner of the house maintained its rhythm. But something inside Olivia stopped. She stood with her glass halfway to her mouth and felt the specific, devastating clarity that arrives when something you have been almost knowing for weeks finally steps fully into the light and makes itself undeniable. It was not exactly a surprise. It was a confirmation. And confirmations always hurt more than surprises because they tell you that some part of you already knew and chose to look away, and you will have to account for that choice eventually. Jina said her name, softly, beside her. Olivia heard it from a distance, the way you hear things when your attention is entirely somewhere else. Ha-jun looked up across the room, saw her. Something moved through his face, a rapid, private recalculation. The expression of a man who had prepared for a version of this moment, but had assumed it would occur in a smaller, more manageable setting, with more time and fewer witnesses. He said something to the woman. She stayed. He crossed the room, warm when he arrived. Ha-jun was always warm. It was the thing she had loved and was now understanding differently. The warmth never left his face even when everything behind it was something else. He said she looked beautiful. Said the woman's name was a colleague. Said he would explain after dinner. It wasn't what it looked like. This wasn't the time or place. She said, "Tell me now who she is." He held her gaze for the length of a moment she would think about later. Then he looked away first. Made a calculation. Decided that later, elsewhere, with more privacy, was still the better management of this situation. That nothing she said in this room right now was going to change that. He went back to the woman, touched her arm, moved her further into the room, as if Olivia were a logistics item he had acknowledged and would return to at a more convenient time. Here's where it gets crazy. She did not cry. She did not raise her voice. She was standing in the Park family's home, in her fiancé's family's home, in a country that was not hers, wearing a ring that suddenly felt like it had been placed on a different woman's hand, and she did absolutely nothing except stand very straight and breathe once, and then again, and let the room continue to move around her as if nothing had shifted. Soo-yeon appeared at her side, slipped her small hand into Olivia's without asking, without explaining, with the simple and absolute solidarity of a child who has understood something she does not have the words for yet. Olivia held her hand, didn't look down, didn't let her face change. That was when she felt it. The specific weight of attention she had first encountered in the arrivals hall. She looked across the room. Jean, who was at the window. He had been there when she arrived, listening to an older man hold the floor at length. He was still there, and he was looking at her, not at Ha-jun, not at the woman beside Ha-jun, not at the social architecture of what had just played out in the middle of his family's gathering. At her, with the steady, unhurried attention of a man who sees things clearly and does not pretend he hasn't. Their eyes met. He did not look away. She did. Dinner was long, and she performed through every minute of it with everything she had. Ha-jun sat 3 seats away with careful social geometry between them. The grandfather at the head of the table held the room with the authority of someone who had been commanding rooms for decades and no longer needed to announce it. Jin, who sat across from her. He spoke rarely, and when he did, the table listened with the particular quality of people who have learned that silence from that source precedes something worth hearing. She watched Jin-Hoo respond to his grandfather twice, both times brief, both times in Korean she couldn't follow, both times received by the old man with a nod that contained more than agreement. It contained something closer to confirmation. The nod of a man watching something he built behave the way he designed it to behave. She watched Ha-jun work the table. He was genuinely good at it. The warm question directed at the right person at the right moment. The story that landed with the right laugh. The self-deprecating beat that made him seem accessible without actually making him vulnerable. She had loved watching this in him once. She had found it reassuring. She was watching it now from a different angle and seeing what it actually was, a performance executed so consistently that it had become invisible. Even to her, for 18 months. She thought, I have been watching the performance and mistaking it for the person. The woman was 2 seats from Ha-jun on the other side, introduced briefly to the table as a colleague from the Seoul office. She had a name. She had a composed, careful smile. She looked at Ha-jun once during the meal with an expression that lasted less than a second and was immediately smoothed over, but Olivia caught it. The expression of someone who had been told the situation was being handled and was measuring, with professional patience, the distance between that claim and the evidence in front of them. Olivia looked at her plate. She thought, we are both performing for the same room, and neither of us is fooling the other. After dinner, she moved through the house until she found a room at the end of a corridor. Low light, dark wood, a grand piano positioned at the window looking out onto the lit garden. She sat down at it and played the way you play when music is the only language honest enough for what you're actually feeling. Something slow and unresolved. The sound of a person who is in the middle of something and does not yet know how it ends. She didn't hear him come in. You play well. She lifted her hands. Turned. Jin, who was in the doorway, watching her with the same unhurried quality of attention she was beginning to understand, was simply how he occupied space in any room he was in. I didn't know anyone was in here, she said. Neither did I. He came into the room. Stopped at the window. Don't stop. I wasn't performing. I know. That's why it was good. She played one note. Let it dissolve entirely before she spoke again. You knew who Soo-yeon was. On the plane. She told you. Yes. And you didn't say anything when I grabbed her like you were. It wasn't the moment for explanations. He was quiet for a moment. You were scared. Scared people don't need to apologize for the shape fear takes. The room held that. She looked at the keys. Ha-jun never mentioned you, she said. In 18 months I never heard your name. He was quiet. Looked out at the garden. Why not? We have a complicated relationship. Apparently. She played the last bar of the piece she had started. Let the sound dissolve completely. He said you were busy. I am. But that wasn't what he meant by it. She turned and looked at him. He looked back. Something moved between them that was not a question and not an answer and was somehow inseparably both. She looked at the keys again. Do you play? She asked. No. He looked at the piano the way he looked at most things, with the attention of someone who genuinely wanted to understand the thing rather than simply know about it. But I've been in rooms with people who do. There's a difference between playing for an audience and playing because you have to. She looked at him. You could hear that? I could hear the absence of it. He paused. You weren't thinking about being heard. That's rare. She pressed a single key, watched the sound fill, and then empty the room. When I was younger, she said, I used to play when I didn't know what else to do with whatever I was feeling. It was the only place I didn't have to translate it into something that made sense to other people. He was quiet for a moment. You should probably go back and do that, then. She looked up at him. There was something in his expression she hadn't seen before. Not sympathy exactly. Something more useful than sympathy. The willingness to acknowledge what was actually happening without dressing it up in something easier to receive. I appreciate that you're not pretending tonight wasn't what it was, she said. Why would I pretend that? Most people would offer an explanation. Find a reason it might not mean what it looks like. He was quiet. Then, I knew about her before tonight. Not the details. But I knew. He said it directly, without apology and without drama. I couldn't tell you. It wasn't my thing to say. She absorbed this. She didn't feel angry at him for it. She understood, actually. Some things are not yours to say, even when saying them would be the kind thing. Even when watching someone stay in the wrong direction would have been easier if they'd had better information. She was 32 years old, and she had spent enough time in complicated situations to understand that there was a difference between keeping a secret and being complicit in a lie. Did Gina know? She asked. Yes. The held gaze in the arrivals hall. The fraction too long. Yes. Of course she knew. She played the last bar of the piece she had started. Let the sound dissolve completely. From somewhere deeper in the house, Ha-jun's laughter reached them, clear and easy and entirely unbothered, traveling through walls the way his warmth always traveled, finding its audience without effort. Jin-Hoo straightened. I should get back. Yes. He stopped at the door. The firm's project launched next week. You're presenting. She looked at him carefully. How do you know that? The Park family has a relationship with the firm. A pause. I'll be there. He left. She stayed at the piano and thought about the ring on her finger and a hand at the small of a stranger's back and a man who had sent tea and 3 words and had never once asked her for anything. She thought about the specific kind of loneliness that exists not in the absence of people, but in the presence of the wrong version of someone you had trusted. She went and found Soo-yeon. Took her home. Like and subscribe right now, because what happens at the project launch is where this story starts turning in a direction nobody is prepared for. The launch was in Gangnam. Olivia arrived early and set up and was reviewing her notes when Ha-jun appeared across the room. Not for the presentations. For her. He crossed to her with the ease of a man who has decided the situation is containable and is proceeding accordingly. She was nobody serious, he said. It was a mistake. Over. He said it with increasing sincerity across what had now been 4 conversations since the gathering, each one delivered with a warmth that Olivia was learning to see clearly for what it was. She looked up at him from her portfolio samples. Was it over before or after you brought her to your family gathering while your fiancé was sitting 3 seats away? I handled it badly. You did. I'll fix it. Said with the confidence of someone who genuinely believed problems announced their own resolution. She studied him for a long moment. This was the version of Ha-jun she was now able to see. Not the version she had loved, which she still believed had been real, but the version that existed beneath it. The one that moved efficiently through difficulty, that kept warmth available as a tool, that had spent a lifetime in a family where things were managed rather than confronted. She could see it clearly now, and she understood it clearly too. She did not hate him for it. She had stopped thinking about it in those terms. She was just trying to see it without the overlay she had been applying for 18 months. She thought about what Jin-Hoo had said. You arrived at something real rather than the version he constructed for you. That's not a failure on your part. The ring was still on her finger. She hadn't removed it. She didn't yet know if that was because she hadn't decided or because she was afraid of what it would mean to decide, and she wasn't ready to know which one it was. All she knew was that she was standing in a room connected to his family, and this conversation was not happening here. I need time, she said. Don't push me right now. He nodded and left. She stared at her portfolio board and breathed and told herself to focus on the work. Jin-Hoo arrived at 7:14. She noticed this, told herself she was not keeping track, and noticed anyway. He came in with people from the firm, speaking Korean, and did not look in her direction. She presented. The room leaned forward. It went well. Afterward, he appeared beside her while she was packing up. Strong work, he said. The light study on the east wall. The lobby render. How did you achieve that angle? You know architectural rendering? I know what intention looks like in a space. He looked at the render on her board. That was designed with real intention. She explained the technique. He asked one question so precise it made her stop mid-sentence and reconsider her own methodology from an entirely different position. They talked, genuinely talked, about light as a structural element rather than an atmospheric one, about the way design spaces alter behavior before the people in them are aware of it, about how the best buildings didn't announce what they were doing to you. They just did it, the way the best conversations worked, until the catering staff were clearing the room around them. She realized at some point that she had stopped noticing the room. That was how she knew a conversation was real, when the environment disappeared and there was only the exchange itself, the specific quality of 2 people thinking out loud together without performing it. She hadn't had a conversation like that in a long time. She hadn't noticed the absence until it was suddenly filled. There's a place in Seoul, he said eventually. Good food. Quiet. No particular occasion required. I'm in a complicated situation, she said. I know. Then you know this isn't simple. I know. He didn't move. I'm not asking for simple. I'm asking you to eat somewhere that is good food. She picked up her case. Looked at him for a moment. I'll think about it. She thought about it for 2 days. Hajun's calls. The ring. Soo-yeon's hand slipping into hers at the gathering without being asked. The version of the future she had been building, and the question that would not stop presenting itself about whether the foundation was what she had believed. And a piano room. And 3 words on a folded note. And the specific quality of a person who gives you space at the exact moment you need it, and how rarely, she was discovering, that actually existed. On Thursday, she walked the Han River. He was already there when she arrived. They had not confirmed a time or a specific meeting place. He was there. They walked without hurry. The river carried the city's reflection in long, broken pieces. She told him about the community center in her Atlanta neighborhood, how she had been 9 years old and stood outside for 6 months watching a falling down building come back to life at the hands of an architect who had no obligation to save it but chose to anyway. How she had watched and thought, someone is doing that with their mind and their hands, and that is what I want my life to be. She had never told that story from beginning to end to anyone. She told him. He listened the way people listen when they are not composing their response while you're still speaking, when they are actually completely present to what you are saying. Hajun apologized again, she said, after a long, quiet stretch. I know. He wants to fix it. He watched the river. What do you want? She was quiet for a while. The version of things I thought I had. That version may not exist. She looked at the water. No, probably not. She paused. The hard thing is that I don't think he was lying when he proposed. I think he meant it. I think the version of me he fell for in New York was real to him, and the version of him I fell for was real too. I just think those versions of us existed in a context that couldn't survive contact with his actual life, with his family, with his city, with whoever he is inside all of that. And I didn't know that until I arrived inside it. Jean, who was quiet. When he spoke, he chose carefully. You arrived at something real rather than the version he constructed for you. That's not a failure on your part. She looked at him. That's a generous way to put it. It's an accurate one. She walked for a few steps in silence. You know him well. For 2 people who don't talk. Better than he knows, Jean, who said. We grew up in the same house for years. Before things became complicated. He paused. Hajun has many excellent qualities. He is also someone who has spent his life finding ways not to be directly accountable for the things he does. The family arrangements have always allowed for that. And you? He looked at the water. I have different qualities and different failures. That's not an answer. No, he said. It isn't. But it's what I have for now. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she started walking again. Hajun came to me, Jean, who said, after the gathering, told me to stay away from you. The air between them changed its quality. Was that the first time he acknowledged you existed? She asked. Something that was close to dry humor moved briefly through his expression. In recent years. Yes. She stopped walking. He stopped too. The river kept going, continuous and indifferent. What are you actually involved in? She said. Not the company filing version. I've seen the cars and the men. I've watched a full arrivals hall reorganize itself around your path without anyone asking it to. I've seen the way your grandfather looks at you. Not like a grandson, like something he built carefully. And I've watched Hajun not say your name for 18 months and then suddenly develop very strong feelings about who you spend your evenings with. He considered this honestly for a moment that felt like it had weight. I run the parts of this family's business that requires someone who doesn't need to be comfortable, he said. The legitimate operations and the ones that aren't quite that. I'm not asking you to accept that. I'm telling you because you asked a direct question and you deserve a complete and honest answer. Are you dangerous? She asked. To some people. Yes. To me? No. To Soo-yeon? He looked at her with more gravity than she had seen from him yet, and she had already seen more gravity from him in a week than from most people across years. Never, he said. That is the one thing I will tell you with certainty and without conditions. She absorbed this. It wasn't everything. They both knew it wasn't everything. But it was the kind of answer you give when you mean it without qualification. And she had been recalibrating her ability to read people over the past 10 days in ways she hadn't anticipated, and what she read in him now was not evasion. It was honesty with its edges intact. The kind of honesty that doesn't soften itself to be easier to receive because it respects you enough to give you the actual weight of it. She thought. Ha-jun would never have answered that question directly. He would have redirected it, reframed it, made her feel slightly imprecise for asking it in those terms. And by the time the conversation ended, she would have known less than when she started and somehow felt better about it anyway. That was his particular skill. That was what she had been mistaking for 18 months for transparency. She started walking again. He fell into step beside her. They walked until the city turned genuinely quiet around them, the late hour having thinned even Seoul's relentless energy down to something almost restful. He flagged a taxi for her and opened the door himself and stood on the pavement with his hands in his pockets as the car pulled out into traffic. She watched him through the rear window, standing in the amber glow of the street lighting, getting smaller with the distance, until Seoul closed over the space where he had been, and she was alone with the city moving past outside the glass and the questions that didn't have answers yet, and the ring that was still on her finger because she hadn't decided what she was deciding. And she was not the kind of woman who acted before she was sure. She got home to Gina's apartment. Soo-yeon had fallen asleep on the couch waiting, one hand still curled around the stuffed rabbit's ear. Olivia carried her to bed, tucked the rabbit in beside her, stood in the doorway for a moment doing the thing she had come to understand as essential in the past 2 weeks. Just looking. Just being sure the most important small person in this apartment was safe and where she was supposed to be and dreaming something good. Then she made tea, sat at the kitchen table with both hands around the mug. The apartment was quiet in the specific way of a place that is already holding something it hasn't told you yet. Like the air had received information that her ears were still waiting on. She thought about the ring on the kitchen counter where she had placed it while washing her face. She had not put it back on yet. She was telling herself this was because her hands were still damp. She was aware this was not the actual reason. She thought about what Jin-Hoo had said when she asked if he was dangerous. Not to you. Not to her. She thought about the way he had said it, without deflection, without qualifying language, without the social lubrication that most people applied to difficult truths to make them easier to receive. He had just said it and let it be what it was. She found that, she realized, more reassuring than a more polished answer would have been. Polished answers were Ha-jun's territory. She had been learning this week what polished answers actually cost. She thought about Soo-yeon in the pink sweater walking through a curtain because curtains were for hiding things and she needed to know what was being hidden. She thought about the stuffed rabbit placed deliberately on the armrest. She thought about a 6-year-old who had walked into a VIP cabin and immediately identified the cousin nobody talked about at dinner and sat down beside him as if this were the most logical thing. She thought. Soo-yeon had walked through a curtain to find out what was on the other side. Maybe, Olivia thought, that wasn't the worst instinct in the world. She looked at her phone. If you think this is where it settles down, you are watching the wrong story. Her phone lit up. Unknown number. A message. You don't belong in this family. Leave Seoul before he destroys what is left of your life. The kitchen got very quiet. She read it once. Read it again. Her hands were completely steady. She had developed the kind of composure that only grows in women who have been required, repeatedly, to hold things together without help, without the option of setting the weight down and letting someone else carry it for a while. It was not a natural composure. It was a practiced and hard-won one, and it had never been more useful than right now in this quiet kitchen in Seoul. She set the phone down, picked it up, set it down. She thought about Ha-jun. She thought about the woman at the gathering and the efficient apologies that moved too quickly past the feeling and the ring on her finger and 18 months of building something on a foundation she had not tested carefully enough. She thought about what it actually costs to admit that what you built was real even if the ground beneath it was wrong. She thought about Jin-Hoo standing beside a river in amber light saying things that landed in her chest with the full weight of something true. She was still inside all of that when her phone rang. Not the unknown number. Jin-Hoo's number. She looked at it ring once. Twice. She picked it up. Jean. The line clicked. A different voice. Low. Controlled. Not his. You shouldn't have answered that. She did not move. The city pressed against every window of the apartment. The tea was still warm in the mug beside her hand. Somewhere in the apartment, Soo-yeon made a small sound in her sleep. That soft, contented sound of a child dreaming something entirely good. Something with no shadows in it. and Olivia's hand tightened around the phone until her knuckles went white. "Who is this?" Her voice was low and level and completely without panic. The voice of a woman who has learned, over years and necessity, that composure is not the absence of fear. It is the decision to act clearly anyway, regardless of what fear is doing underneath. Nothing. The line went dead. She sat in the kitchen while the tea went cold. Seoul breathed outside the window. That city of layers and kept things, all its deep, intricate history running just beneath the visible surface like a current, all its arrangements and allegiances and the costs that nobody puts in writing because the people who need to know already know and the people who don't know yet are better off that way. She thought, someone is trying to move me out of this situation. She thought, someone used his phone to do it, which means someone had access to his phone before this call was made, which means something had already happened to Jinhoo tonight before I picked up, and I don't have that information yet. She looked at the door to the room where Soo-yeon was sleeping. She thought about the way Jin-ah had looked at her over Soo-yeon's head in the arrivals hall, that held gaze that communicated more than the words around it. She thought about a 6-year-old who knew the name of the cousin nobody mentions at dinner, who had identified him immediately on site on a plane and walked directly to his seat because the investigation required it. She thought about what Soo-yeon had said when she got there. "You look like Uncle Ha-jun, but more quiet." She thought, what does a 6-year-old know about this family that she has never been told, but has simply absorbed from being in rooms where the adults were managing things they assumed she wasn't paying attention to? She thought about Ha-jun, about 18 months of warmth that she was now understanding as a surface rather than a foundation, about a ring she had placed on the kitchen counter and not yet picked back up, about what it meant to be sitting in Seoul, in his family's orbit, holding all of this at once. She thought about a piano room and a quiet voice and 3 words on a folded note, and the specific feeling of being seen by someone who was not trying to make you feel seen, just seeing. And somewhere in this city, in whatever room Jinhoo was in, managing whatever situation had already developed before this call reached her, his phone rang into the dark, and rang, with no answer. If you need to know what happens next, you already know exactly what to do. Subscribe, hit the notification bell, drop a comment below, and tell me, whose voice was that on the line? Is it Ha-jun protecting the position he is already beginning to lose? Is it someone higher in this family who has looked at what is happening and decided that Olivia James is a variable that needs to be resolved before it becomes an actual problem? Is it someone who was in that arrivals hall and watched Jinhoo look at her across 300 feet of airport and understood immediately what that meant even if she didn't? And the question that nobody has asked out loud yet, what does Soo-yeon know about the cousin nobody talks about at dinner? And what happens when a 6-year-old's investigation leads somewhere none of the adults were ready for? She's been watching people. She's been watching the whole time. And 6-year-olds who ask why curtains exist in places that aren't windows do not stop asking questions just because the adults in the room would prefer they did. Because the next episode is going to change the shape of everything that came before it. And some of you are going to see it coming. And some of you are not. Drop your predictions below right now and subscribe so you're here when it drops.